Do you have a lot of thoughts about your chronic illness or chronic pain that are making you feel anxious or depressed? Are your thoughts hooking you and stopping you from engaging in the activities you wish you were? Do you have the thought that your life won't be good anymore because of your illness? If any or all of this resonates with you, then definitely stick around for this week's episode because we're diving into how to create some distance between ourselves and our thoughts about our chronic illnesses. Welcome back to Chronically Living. I'm Kelsey Harris, chronic illness warrior and psychotherapist. On Chronically Living and How to Make the Most of It, we're providing tangible ways to improve the well-being of Spoonies. So get ready to make the most out of your life, even with that pesky chronic illness. Hey everyone, thanks as always for tuning into the show. This week, we're going to continue with our acceptance and commitment therapy hexaflex. So, like the episode on contacting the present moment, this episode will be heavy with the psychoeducation. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, I would recommend listening to it first. If you really want, you can listen to it after, but I would say first just because I explain ACT in a bit more detail there. I'm going to briefly explain the hexaflex again for anyone who doesn't remember, because that was a few weeks ago. Basically, this type of cognitive, behavioral, experiential, existential therapy has 6 main processes that it uses. They are contacting the present moment, defusion, acceptance, values, committed action, and self as context. They all work together and overlap and are used in a very flexible manner during actual psychotherapy. For the purposes of this podcast, I'm giving some psychoeducation on each of these during solo episodes, and I'm offering a couple of skills you can use to work with them on your own. I also highly recommend self-help materials such as The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris if you want to explore these further on your own. As I mentioned in the Contacting the Present Moment episode, ACT has a ton of evidence as being helpful for chronic pain and chronic illness. And as a therapist, this is what I specialize in, is clients like you, basically, and like me. So this is really the perfect modality for me to use and what I typically use with my clients. So let me briefly explain the process we're working with today. Defusion. Okay, I'm going to admit that it is a very jargony name and that makes it a bit of a turnoff. So let me give it a better name here. Creating distance between you and your thoughts. This is the opposite of fusion. So fusion is when our thoughts dominate our behavior. And therefore, defusion is responding flexibly to our thoughts so they do not dominate our behavior. And that's me quoting Russ Harris. What we need to learn to do is to notice our thoughts with curiosity, openness, and flexibility. Now, if this sounds a lot like mindfulness, that's because mindfulness is an essential skill for this process. Now, for those of you who have had more traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, you might be thinking, okay, this sounds kind of familiar. And it is similar in a lot of ways, but there are some major differences. So in CBT, we learn to notice our thoughts, review the evidence for and against how accurate the thought is, and then replace it with a new thought. And hey, there's a ton of evidence that this works. I actually use it with my perinatal clients. As a client myself, when I went to therapy, my therapist used CBT with me as well as mindfulness, but a lot of CBT. And this was the model I learned to help me with my thoughts. So if that way of doing it works for you, keep with it, right? I'm just going to give you an alternative way here. The real difference in ACT is that we just see thoughts as thoughts. They aren't good or bad. They just come and go. And our minds are actually wired to continuously generate the thoughts, like all the time. And some of these thoughts we like and they're helpful to us, and some are just really not helpful. And as we learn to see thoughts as just thoughts without holding any particular meaning, we can create distance between ourselves and them. And this is the most difficult to do with our core beliefs, but we're not going to worry too much about that for this episode. I'll briefly touch on it at the end. Instead, we're just going to focus on creating distance between ourselves and our thoughts about our illness and our pain in general. And you can do these with really thoughts that aren't about your illness or pain either. But for the purposes of today, I will focus on our illnesses. Okay, so the first thing we need to learn to do is to notice what is hooking us. So what thoughts are the ones we're getting caught up on? Some common thoughts are, my life is terrible now. My life will never be the same. I can't do this anymore. Can't do anything anymore. No one will want to be with me if I'm ill. I'm not a good parent or partner or sibling or child, etc. anymore. I can't handle this. I'm sure you've had at least some of these thoughts yourselves. And guess what? You're totally normal. Your mind even sounds a lot like mine. Everyone's mind makes thoughts, worries, judgments, fears, fantasies, stories, and predictions. Our primitive ancestors actually needed these thoughts in order to escape from danger. Otherwise, they could literally die. Unfortunately for us, our minds keep doing this even though the threat of imminent death, like getting eaten by a wolf, is extremely low. Basically, our minds are trying their best to protect us, to keep us safe. Okay, so if you're ready, let's try a little exercise together to see if this helps explain all of this a little bit better. Please don't try this if you're driving a car or doing something else where you'd be unsafe, because you're actually going to need both your hands for this. So if you're ready, just look around the room. I want you just to imagine that it's filled with everything that matters to you. So people, places, activities, things you like types of food you like, and so on. And it's also filled with all the problems in your life. So your health problems, relationship problems, money problems, etc. And there are also the regular tasks of life, such as chores and shopping and all of that. Okay, so let's imagine that our hands are our thoughts and feelings. So put your hands together, side by side, like they're representing an open book. Now bring your hands close to your eyes. And this is what happens when we get hooked by our thoughts. You can't really see anything but your hands. So you can't see anything but your thoughts. You might notice that you become disengaged from other people. You might also notice that you can't focus your attention. And you might also notice that you can't engage in any tasks. Your thoughts and feelings cause you to miss out on life. Okay, so what happens when we distance ourselves from them? So just lower your hands about halfway. Notice how much more you can see around you. Now drop them onto your lap. You're now free to not only notice what's around you, but to engage with it. Now notice that your hands, which are still representing your thoughts and feelings, they're still there, still in my lap. We didn't get rid of them. To quote Russ Harris again, even really painful thoughts and feelings often have useful information that can help us, even if it's just pointing us towards problems we need to address or things we need to do differently, or simply reminding us to be kinder to ourselves. And if there's nothing useful we can do with them, we just let them sit there. And yes, we can do this even with our thoughts about our illnesses. How do I know this? Well, aside from the wealth of research, literature on this subject, this is literally the most researched process in ACT. I've seen it work with clients and I've used it on myself. In fact, I often use it on myself because my mind comes up with all kinds of stuff that, well, it's trying to be helpful and protective, instead gives me a feeling like anxiety. What I learned is that it's okay that my mind does this, as long as I know what to do when it does do this. After the break, I'm going to give you a few ideas on how to create distance between yourself and your thoughts. Hey warriors, what if it was possible to get local, fresh groceries delivered right to your front door? You could take up deep sea yoga with all that free time. Well, Instacart gives you unlimited grocery delivery for one low monthly fee. This is definitely better than paying for delivery on all those other apps. Forget that one ingredient you needed to make that super healthy smoothie. Instacart can deliver to your front door in as little as an hour. You can shop multiple stores, getting all your favorites on a single order. Instacart even highlights deals so that you can save money. Get all the products you love, hand-selected by shoppers based on your preferences. They'll pick the freshest produce, and they'll keep your eggs safe too. Find everything you usually buy and get smart suggestions on new items. To get free delivery on your first order over $10, follow the link in the show notes to let Instacart know that we sent you and help support the show. With Instacart, you'll never step foot in a grocery store again. All right, so as promised, I'm going to give you a couple of ways to create some distance between yourself and your thoughts. There are actually hundreds of individual techniques you can use, but we're just going to focus on a few simple ones here just to give you a start. So the first one is really simple. It's, I'm having the thought that. So here's an example. Let's say your thought is, I'm never going to have a good life again. So we're going to rephrase this to, I'm having the thought that I'm never going to have a good life again. And we can even take it further and rephrase it to, I notice I'm having the thought that I'm never going to have a good life again. What you might notice is the more you do this, the less painful the thought becomes. Here's another technique. It's called silly voices. Now, this one, I want to make sure you don't feel invalidated. And this technique is one that I find okay to use on myself, but I don't typically use it with clients unless I think they would really be okay with it. So some of you, this one you'll hate, and others you will be totally fine with it. So basically, it's going to go like this. You're going to take your thoughts. Let's use a different example from one of those common chronic illness thoughts. So I'm not a good partner anymore. Now let's try singing it to the tune of Happy Birthday. I'm not a good partner anymore. That's not the tune of Happy Birthday. Doesn't matter. Whatever, sing it in any way you want. Oh, okay. Or inside your head, hear it in the voice of a cartoon character, or you can do it out loud. So, I'm not a good partner anymore. It's my Yoda voice. So repeat that a few times and see what your response is. And it might make you laugh. And again, if this is something that you're like, oh, like it makes me feel stupid about that thought, well, that's not the point. So if that's what it's doing to you, just don't use this technique. But for me, I'm like, oh yeah, that is kind of a silly thought. Or maybe it's just a thought. It's what it comes down to. It's just a thought. And I like this technique because it's kind of silly and I'm kind of silly. The third technique I'm going to give you is more of a meditative one. So for those of you who like mindfulness, this would be a great one for you to do. You can also find a bit longer version of it on my YouTube channel, which is Kelsey L. Harris Meditations. And I'm going to link that channel in the show notes for you. The meditation itself is called Leaves on a Stream. So again, if you are driving or on a run, and maybe this is not the best time for you to do this practice, but if you're sitting somewhere and can participate, let's start by getting ourselves into a comfortable upright position. Maybe just notice your breath for a moment. And you can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. Otherwise, just find a spot to focus them on. Imagine that you're sitting next to a gently flowing stream. And on the top of the stream, there are some leaves floating on the surface. And over the next few minutes, just notice the thoughts that come up for you. As you notice each thought, place it on a leaf and allow it to come and stay and go in its own time. We're not trying to make the leaves float away. We're just noticing what happens. It may float away quickly, or maybe slowly, or it might stay a while. Do this with all of your thoughts, whether they're positive or negative, pleasurable or painful. Even if they're wonderful thoughts, just place them onto a leaf and allow them to come and stay and go in their own time. Simply notice what happens without trying to change anything. If your thoughts stop, just watch the stream until the thoughts start up again. Remember, we're not trying to speed up the stream, and we're not trying to get rid of the thoughts. We're just allowing them to come and go as they please. If your mind tells you that this is stupid, too hard, place those thoughts on a leaf as well. If a leaf gets stuck, then just let it hang around for a while. We're not forcing them to go away. If you notice a painful feeling arise, maybe boredom, impatience, or anxiety, just acknowledge it. Say, here's the feeling of boredom, and then place those words onto a leaf. From time to time, your thoughts will hook you and pull you away from the stream. This is totally normal and will likely happen over and over. When you've realized it's happened, gently acknowledge it, and then go back to watching the stream. Now we'll bring the exercise to an end. So sit up in your chair, open your eyes, notice what you can see and hear, and take a stretch. Okay, before we wrap up this episode, I want to clarify a couple of things when it comes to diffusion or creating this distance. We are not trying to feel better or get rid of unwanted thoughts. We are trying to reduce how impactful problematic thoughts are on our behavior and to become more psychologically present and engaged in our experiences. In other words, we're helping ourselves to be able to engage in mindful, values-based living. Sometimes you will notice that the thoughts go away. It's fantastic. Or that you quote unquote, feel better. But remember, that's not going to happen every time that you use one of these techniques. And it's really not the point of diffusion. So if you are wanting to practice this on your own, absolutely go for it, but don't have that expectation in your mind that you're just going to feel better every time you do it, because that's probably not going to happen. As I said earlier, our minds are really designed to generate these thoughts. So this isn't a distraction technique. I did the episode on creative hopelessness a while back. You can always go listen to that if you're not really sure what I mean by distraction techniques. I definitely talk about that a lot more in that episode as well. And the Patreon content this week contains a few more techniques that you can try out. It's just $5 a month for that. So there's some great bonus content every week for you, a couple of free ebooks. And what it does is if you support the show, then I can invest in better equipment. I would really like to upgrade my microphone, stuff like that. So yes, if you like the show, I would definitely appreciate the support for it. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we weren't working with beliefs so much today as we are with thoughts in general. And I know that sometimes we really believe some things about our illness to be true. The point with defusion is not to judge our thoughts as true or false. I'm not going to debate with you whether they are or not. And I don't really think there's a point in you debating with yourself whether they are true or not. Sometimes our thoughts are completely true, and a lot of the time they're not. I actually had a conversation with a friend fairly recently, not about illness, but a different life issues of hers. And I gently just reminded her that we don't know if her thoughts are true or not. What we do know is that they are just thoughts. So even with our beliefs, don't concentrate whether they're true or false. Instead, just learn to unhook from them if they're problematic for you, so that you can put your energy instead into being the person you want to be, having the life you want to have, and doing the things that you want to do. Let's reflect. What did you notice about your thoughts and feelings during this episode? If you tried the techniques out, what did you notice about your thoughts and feelings during and after them? What was your experience with your thoughts before the episode versus now? And what are you noticing now as you reflect back on that noticing? Whereas I hope this was helpful information for you. If you're really struggling with your mental health, please find a therapist in your area. A lot of therapy is provided through telehealth as well as in person. And, there are therapists who use sliding scales. So if you can't afford the full rate, there are some therapists who will charge less. Sometimes therapy is covered by insurance. Depending on your insurance coverage, you should definitely look into that. Sometimes it's government funded. I know I did community mental health here in British Columbia, Canada, and we do have government funded short-term psychotherapy available for people with moderate to severe mental health problems. So if you have a chronic illness, you probably will qualify for that moderate level, just based on what I saw during my practicum experience when I was doing the community counseling. And I did have a whole bunch of chronic pain, chronic illness clients with, depression or anxiety. So just maybe look into some of those options for you. And I just want you to remember that it doesn't actually matter what kind of therapy your therapist practices, because at the end of the day, the two most important of the four factors that are important, but the two most important factors for client outcomes, so AKA if you get better, is the relationship between you and your therapist. So you really need someone that you connect with, and then what you yourself bring to therapy, and that's both inside and outside of sessions. The next solo episode, we're going to look at acceptance, which may sound silly, but I'll explain it more then. In the meantime, I have some amazing guest episodes coming out. Keep on making the most of it, everyone. Special thanks to Marty for the original music and Charity Williams for the original artwork.